King David, a man after God's own heart. Gentlemen, if you are looking to become a masculine and godly man, look no further than King David in the Old Testament. His life is a blueprint for how men in the modern day era today can basically become more masculine and succeed in pretty much any environment you can think of, and especially goes for corporate America. So what's going on, guys? Welcome back to Faith and Fortune Academy. My name's Ben. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I'm a follower of Jesus Christ. By the grace of God, I'm currently making over six figures. I have a half-funded undergraduate degree and a fully funded graduate school degree in engineering. I secured multiple full-time offers from over 3 different Fortune 500 companies, and my goal is to help Christian men navigate corporate America without losing their souls. So today, I'm very excited to go over the topic of today's video is King David. So he's one of my favorite characters in the Old Testament. I'm sure many of you have heard of him, you know of his story as a bit of a rough outline. So if you do want to go deeper into the story of King David, of course, first and foremost, I recommend the Bible, right? So 1st and 2nd Samuel details his life. 1 Samuel is when he's, a shepherd boy and details all the way to on the run from Saul. And then eventually when he does become king, that's where the book of 2 Samuel picks up. And the story is also detailed in 1 Kings as well as 1 Chronicles. And the Psalms are a record of a lot of the poems and songs that he would write while he was on the run from Saul. Fun fact, he actually wrote most of his Psalms while he was on the run. And his quality, or not the quality rather, but his output actually dropped off after that time period. So we'll dive a little bit more into that a little bit later in this video. But yeah, of course, if you want to know about David, go read the Bible. Other really good resources, House of David, excellent show. It's on Amazon Prime. Highly recommend watching it. It is extremely high quality. The acting is phenomenal. The sets, the dialogue written, and it's biblically sound, so that's the best part about it. It feels like with a lot of productions, it's either, okay, it's high quality in the writing, but light on the theology, or even, contradicting what the Bible teaches, or it's the opposite extreme. It's extremely theologically sound, but the production is just not there. This has both of those combined, so it's fantastic. Highly recommend giving it a watch. And finally, Charles Swindoll's book, David. He's got a great series on biblical characters, and David was the very first one. Highly recommend picking it up. It is an excellent book that really dives deep, not only into King David's life and his lifestyle, but also just nuances in terms of, hey, what was it like during the phase of life where he was on the run from Saul? Spoiler alert, we're going to dive into that too. It just goes very, very in-depth if you want something that's going to go a little bit deeper into the character. So, starting out in the early years, in the pastures. So, David was born in the city of Bethlehem. He was the youngest of 8 sons, and his job, as you can see in this picture, is to tend the sheep. He was the youngest, so he's out there in the shepherd's fields, he's tending the sheep, and my guy's also a musician. He's playing the harp, okay? So he's busting out tunes on his harp, and he's watching sheep, and he knows these sheep by name, and he's described as a dark, handsome, with beautiful eyes kind of man, right? And you might be asking, well, why is that important? Well, right before this, the Bible describes, and Samuel comes to this town of Bethlehem because God leads him there. Basically, Saul screwed up. He's this, Saul is supposed to be this man who's following God and is supposed to be leading the Israelites towards these battles in order to take over. However, Saul, basically his own ego, long story short, gets in the way, and he starts disobeying God and compromising in many ways. And eventually God says, all right, that's it. I'm tearing the kingdom away from you, and I'm giving it to someone else. And so Samuel's his prophet that he's using to do this through. And so he tells Samuel, hey, go and find, the next man who I'm going to anoint to be king, and go and anoint him, and I will reveal that to you in the right time. And so Samuel pretty much follows this, and God tells Samuel, hey, don't worry about what's on the outside, look at what's on the inside, right? Man looks on the outward appearance, I look at the heart. And so you might think, well, wait, then why is it describing David as handsome? It's basically to say, hey, yes, David is a handsome guy, but that's not the reason that God chose him. God chose him for his character. God chose him for his heart that was genuinely pursuing God's best interests. Okay? So that's first and foremost the thing. So if you're sitting this and you're worried, oh no, I'm not dark or handsome, don't worry about it. That's really, as we're going to see further in this breakdown, that's not really that important in success as a man. So, the warrior phase. So this is about from the ages of 15 to 30. That's a rough estimate. At least the first half of that is rough. The second half we know. We'll get into that. Anyway, confronts Goliath. So this is a really cool part of Scripture. As you all know, the fight between David and Goliath. So Goliath's representing the Philistines, and David's representing the Israelites. And basically the terms are, hey, each of them send one warrior in for combat. Whoever wins right? And by the way, wins is, a cute term here for kills the other guy. It's not, oh, I knocked him out, in like a boxing match. Nope, it was to the death. So there's very real stakes here. And so, Goliath is literally a giant. He's 9 feet tall, roughly about that size. He's described. Some sources say he's a Nephilim, which is, if you don't know, it's basically half human, half demon, or half angel, fallen angel, right? Pretty crazy stuff, pretty wild. But anyway, he gets sent out. David gets sent out. And fun fact, David is serving in the house of Saul. He's playing the harp, right? So God sovereignly sets that up. So David's in the kingdom of Saul, or rather in the house of Saul, and his job is to soothe him because God had sent a tormenting spirit to Saul as punishment for disobeying him, and also to set up the events to where David would soon take over. Now, confronting Goliath. So some of you might not know how exactly David got here. So basically, the story of this is Jesse, David's father, sends David to the battlefield with his older brothers. His older brothers are fighting, or they're supposed to be fighting, but they're standing around. Nobody wants to go and fight Goliath. And so what ends up happening is it gets announced, hey, whoever kills Goliath, they're going to get a bag, right? Not just any bag. They're going to get a bunch of land. They're not going to owe taxes anymore. And they're going to get the hand of Saul's daughter, Michal. And so David's hearing this. He confirms it, and he says, okay, awesome, bet. I'm going to go take care of this. Now, that's part of the reason. So he made sure he understood the terms of the deal. And when Goliath was blaspheming the name of God, saying he defies the house of Israel and he defies God, David knew, okay, that's it. He's got a zeal for God's name. It's time to take out Goliath, right? So, boom, he's got all the motivation in the world to do that. So, long story short, he picks 5 small, smooth stones and boom, knocks out Goliath, cuts off his head. It's amazing. Everyone's happy. And he ends up becoming best friends with Jonathan, who is one of David's sons and is actually an extremely righteous guy. And we'll have a full breakdown of Jonathan's story on this channel in the future because I'm excited to get into him. But he's actually Saul's son, and he's basically the opposite of Saul. So Saul is very much focused on himself, on his own kingdom. Jonathan is concerned with the things of God and for serving him and his people, Israel. So Jonathan would have made an excellent king. He really would have. But as we see, that doesn't pan out that way. And so, he marries Michal. He marries Saul's daughter. And it says that Michal loved David. Okay, she was obsessed with him. She loved him. This was not, oh, shoot, I got to marry this guy. Oh, man, this really sucks. A lot of those arranged marriages really didn't work out in terms of compatibility or love. But no, I mean, Michal loved him. Michal loved David. She was obsessed about him. And it worked out really great for the both of them, at least for now. So, everything goes great until that tormenting spirit we mentioned with Saul. It causes Saul to basically try and kill David on multiple occasions. And so eventually David realizes, oh shoot, I can't stay here. I gotta get out of here. And so he ends up on the run from Saul. Saul's literally hunting him down to try and kill him. And during this time period, this is the warrior phase. So David actually ends up on the run from Saul, and there's a ton that goes on in here, so I'm literally skimming the surface. But he basically hangs out with the Philistines, the very people whose champion he had just killed, right, and taken the armor and and the sword as a trophy. And so now he's literally working with the Philistines to make money, and he's leading a band of men. Right, so he's leading a bunch of men together, and they're basically, they're taking on missions, they're gathering things, and there's not really necessarily a defined end goal, and yet God's hand is in the background working through him on this whole thing. Now, a bunch of stuff happens, and it's pretty crazy, like David goes on the run, and then a bunch of his wives, which, fun fact, David had multiple wives there, and we'll get into that whole story. And he ends up, actually one of the wives he meets, whose name is Abigail, he ends up getting her from a very rich landowner who was very stingy with David. David was about to go and kill him for being stingy, and because David and his men were protecting basically the flock and helping to protect the health of the sheep, and they just asked for a small, amount of food in exchange, and this dude was very, very selfish, didn't allow it to happen. Long story short, David ends up getting with his wife. So his wife comes out to basically say, hey, here's a bunch of food. She throws herself on her hands and knees, and on behalf of her husband to basically say, hey, we're sorry we screwed up. Please don't kill us. And David ends up turning from his anger, and he ends up turning back, and he remembers, oh, right, I'm supposed to be following God, not committing murder out here. And so basically her husband ends up dying. David takes her on as his wife. So yeah, my man David, he's a savage. He's getting all the girls. And he's learning how to be a man, how to be a leader. So, all that to say, Saul and Jonathan end up dying in battle. Again, it's a crazy story. I highly recommend you get into it for yourself. I'm skimming the surface here. And so David ends up crowned king of Israel at 30 years old. However, now he has to go to war with Saul's remaining forces who are still loyal to his kingdom. So it's not just instant that he gets this. However, he is eventually crowned king at 37 over all of Israel. And so I like to point this out too. This all happened at 37, guys. 30 to 37 is when David hit his prime in terms of, okay, now he's king over everybody. Okay, a lot of us expect, okay, I need to be rich and successful by 22 or 23 or it's all over, right? It's this instant gratification culture. Literally, David, from the time he was 15 years old, even younger than that, right? He was building. He was working in every single season. He was tending the sheep. He killed bears and lions, and that prepared him to kill Goliath, right? And him being on the run from Saul taught him survival instincts. He's learning how to lead other men. And so as a result, now he's able to be king, and he knows he's gone through the struggle, he's gone through humility to be able to handle that power that he gets later. And so this is, again, guys, we really highlight the Christian male advantage of using your teenage years and your 20s to set up 30 plus for yourself. Because if you've done the right work, you have exponential options later on. So yeah, David's crowned king at 37 over all of Israel. Jerusalem gets captured. The ark's transported over there. And my guy David, he just crushes it. He gets military victory after military victory. So he is riding high. Unfortunately, with great heights can come the potential for great falls. And we're going to see that in the next slide here. As I have very appropriately titled it, David's Riz backfires. So, here's the story. Let me set up the scenario. David is usually very active in battle, and one day he just decides, hey, I'm not going to participate in this battle. I'm going to take it easy. I'll chill back at the palace, eat some food, hang out, maybe take some naps, right? And there's nothing wrong with rest. Unfortunately, David took this rest a little too extreme, because one day as he's just chilling on his rooftop, he ends up seeing Bathsheba, and she's bathing. And he can see everything. There's nothing left to the imagination in David's mind. And so he ends up seducing her and getting her pregnant, right? And this, I say it wouldn't be an issue. Of course, you shouldn't do this naturally, but it was completely consensual. But the issue with this was she was married. And his advisors warned him, hey, wait, she's married. She has a husband named Uriah. And even worse, Uriah is one of David's most loyal soldiers. He's literally in battle, actually, at this point in time. And so David has Uriah killed in battle, basically sends him to the hardest part of the battle, withdraws the help, boom, Uriah is killed. And so David thinks, okay, cool, bet, I've gotten away with this. Unfortunately for him, and is the reality, God sees everything. So, through the prophet Nathan, right, he confronts David through a story. Basically tells him, hey, here's a story of a man who had a lamb, and this lamb was really precious to him, and there's this rich guy who had a bunch of land, a bunch of everything, and that rich guy takes the only lamb and slaughters it to feed a hungry guest. And David's outraged. He's like, what the heck? That man should be repaying him for everything. Like, why did he do this? And Nathan basically says, David, you're that man, right? And he basically tells him, listen, God, this is speaking on behalf of God. I gave you everything. I gave you wives, I gave you money, I gave everything into your hand, and this is the key. If it were too little, I would have given you more. See, a lot of modern day Christianity tells, oh, money is bad, wealth is bad, prosperity is bad, it's just Jesus. And yes, of course, for salvation, it is through faith alone, grace alone, in Christ alone. But wealth is not a bad thing. Wealth is a tool. Wealth reflects the heart, right? It's how you use that wealth that matters. And God was saying, David, you should have come to me if you wanted more. Right? Instead, you took matters into your own hands, and you committed this terrible sin. You committed adultery and murder. And by the way, those are the two big issues right there. And I know this is going to be a bit of a spicy take. If Bathsheba were single, of course, it's not the best way for David to take her on, and there's a whole thing about polygamy, and that's definitely not God's ideal. But if David had done it that way, if Bathsheba were a single woman, then this would be a much different story. But the problem was she was married, and David had her husband, David had the husband Uriah killed. So those are the big issues right there. I feel like that gets glossed over a ton. Anyway, David repents. It's actually where we get Psalm 51 from, which I highly recommend you go visit anytime you fall into sin. And I'll have a full breakdown of that at some point too. But yeah, basically at this point, Nathan says, okay, David, because you repented, you're not going to die. Like, God has forgiven you. However, you're still going to have to face the consequences. The sword is never going to leave your house. And basically that's translation for you're going to have to deal with constant fighting and stress. So think about this, guys. David made one lustful decision to go after Bathsheba, and it literally, for the rest of his life, like, he has to deal with the consequences of it. He has to deal with stress. I wouldn't even be surprised if this actually shortened his lifespan just from the amount of stress he had to deal with. But anyway, so David has a bunch of kids, and this is why not to go for polygamy. He has multiple wives, and he has multiple kids from these wives, and the kids a lot of them end up hating each other. One of his sons ends up raping the half-sister, a sexual assault, absolutely terrible. And one of his other sons ends up killing him as revenge for that, And so Absalom ends up being one of the sons, and there's a whole story on Absalom. It's crazy. Basically, this dude's one of the best-looking guys in all of Israel. He's handsome, he's good-looking, charismatic, right? And he almost ends up taking over the kingdom from David. And thankfully, it did not work. David, ends up his forces end up overwhelming Absalom. And Absalom, due to his vanity, he grew out his hair. And I'm all for having flow, guys, but not at the sake of vanity. And he ends up caught in a tree and dies via a spear from his commander, who takes him down. So, yeah, not great. Not a great way to end your life, especially for a guy as talented as him. So, yeah. But David, of course, is devastated by this. And naturally, when you see your own son die, that's not great. That's not fun, especially when you've had such a rocky relationship with him. So, yeah, that's not a lot of fun. So, David's final years, his final decade of life, so he orders a census and ends up getting disciplined for it. So, some people are confused by this, why did this happen? And the prevailing idea is that basically when you take a census, it's this idea of, oh, I own this, right? And David's heart, simply put, was, oh, I own Israel. I own these people. Everything I have, yeah, this is mine. Yeah, I did this. So basically getting the similar sense of what Saul had, where he was basically obsessed with his own kingdom, not realizing, no, this is from God. This is on loan. That's one of the things we talk about here on Faith and Fortune Academy, is that everything you have, guys, yes, you might have worked hard to get it, but God gave you the ability to gain wealth. God gave you the ability to earn money, to work hard, and to use that energy. So at the end of the day, it all belongs to God. Like, we have to have open hands for everything. It's not, oh, what can I get? It's what can we do to steward God's mission in his kingdom. So all of that to say, David basically ends up getting punished, disciplined for this census. And unfortunately, the people have to suffer for it, as many people end up getting hit by the punishment that God sends on them. And so, so that happens. David ends up preparing for Solomon, his son, right, with Bathsheba. So the first child that they had ended up passing away as part of God's punishment. And David ends up having another son with Bathsheba, whose name is Solomon. Again, you might be familiar with that name. Solomon ends up becoming one of the wisest men in the world throughout history, wealthiest, everything. We'll have a full breakdown of Solomon coming up soon on the channel. Very excited for that. And David ends up, preparing that temple for him. And he ends up dying at the age of 70. And this is really interesting to note. He died at a good old age, full of days, riches, and honor. Right? And Solomon reigned in his place. So notice that. It didn't say, David kind of petered out and he started strong and then kind of, fizzled out the end here. He died of a good old age. His days were full, right? He had money, he had status, he had everything going for him. So that's something to realize, guys. And we're going to wrap up this video right here. Some key lessons I want you guys to take away from David's life. The male journey is a long journey. So you have time. Don't worry if you're 21, 22, and you're thinking, oh my gosh, I'm not making six figures, I'm not where I need to be. That is completely fine. I mean, shoot, if you're watching this as a teenager, get started tomorrow, but also enjoy the journey, right? And just realize, listen, it'd be so easy to look at David and be like, wow, he really wasted all those fields, or all those hours in the field. Yeah, he should have been, reading a course on how to be an effective king, right? Of course not. That's stupid. God knew what he was doing when he put David through that journey, okay? That which, by the way, God refines his warriors. If you're in Christ, right, and you belong to God, he is going to do everything for your good and his glory. That's Romans 8:28, right? That's something to keep in mind, guys. If you're following God, then he is going to refine you. And listen, it doesn't mean you're going to have an easy life. In fact, some of the greatest men we see in the Bible, right? Joseph, David, Moses, Abraham, even Jesus himself, right? Of course, fully God and fully man, did not live easy lives. And yet, we still remember their names today. We still see them in the Bible as the main characters. And of course, Christ is the main character and focus of the whole Bible, right? And so I want to leave you this one last point. No season's wasted, right? There's a really excellent line from The Chosen. Again, another breakdown we're going to have here. Another excellent show. Philip, and I'll preface this by saying it's not actually in the Bible, but it does echo a lot of biblical themes and points. The phrase he says is, time, especially when you're following God, it doesn't get wasted, it just gets rearranged. It's the same thing here. God, there is no season that gets wasted. You get an exponential effect, an exponential return, right? You might be somebody who's struggling, or you're in a lonely phase right now. God might be isolating you. It doesn't get wasted, because later on it'll pay an exponential effect, an exponential dividend, right? When you start to get some of the things that God has in store for you, right? So, yeah, that's pretty much it, guys. Faith and Fortune Academy, link in the program below. It's a program I made to help Christian men navigate corporate America without losing their soul. The mindset of this is, being as innocent as a dove, being as wise as a serpent. And I wanted to really condense a lot of the experience that I gained over my time in corporate America. And one of the bonuses that I'm planning to have in there is the King David application blueprint, where basically I'm going to walk you through King David's life, key lessons from David's life, where you can specifically apply it to working in corporate America and the modern day equivalent of that. So if that's something you're interested in, check out the link below, and I'll see you guys next time.